Thank you, Dennis. It's a great pleasure to be here. As Dennis said, I'm a professor at the Wharton School, where I study the application of analytics and AI to managerial decision-making. And I look at a number of different industries ranging from digital media, digital marketing, e-commerce, and a few others. I've been at Wharton since 2003. So in fact, Nicole and I were just talking 15 years at Wharton. And in fact, when I started at Wharton, I got mistaken for a student a lot. And I remember the very first class I walked into classroom, and I was trying to address the students and just couldn't get their attention. You know, everyone's doing their own thing. And then I kind of gave up and just sat in the first row and turned to the student who was next to me. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I turned to him and I said, "I heard this professor sucks." And so he said, "Oh yeah, you know, I guess I have terrible luck this year. I walked in from Professor so-and-so's class." He named a colleague of mine, and that guy really sucks like crazy. And then he started complaining about this professor, and eventually at some point people started wondering where's the professor. So I stood up to address the classroom finally, and then he had this look of sheer horror for the next 80 minutes. And then I never saw him again after that one class. So I don't do that anymore. But yeah, so I've been at Wharton for a while. I teach a course called Enabling Technologies. It's really a course on what's going on in tech. So we look at a number of different areas in tech and look at trends there. And in addition to my teaching, I was a co-founder of a company called Yodel, which was a digital marketing platform for small businesses. I started it in 2005 and created the IP for the company, and a couple of my students ran operations and sales until we raised venture money and hired a professional management team to run the company. And we sold that 3 years back to a public company called Web.com. We had about 1,200 employees at the time we sold the company. But what was my work within the company was really thinking about how to leverage all the data we collected on our marketing activities online and really optimize the way we move the dollars and really think about customer data as a strategic asset for these companies. I've also worked with a number of startups. And in all this work, the use of machine learning and analytics has been central. And in fact, I'm contractually obligated to reveal every time I talk about anything really these days is that I have a book coming out in March. It's a book called A Human's Guide to Machine Intelligence, and it's an overview of really the societal and business implications of being able to make decisions through machine learning and analytics. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about all the recent interest and hype around artificial intelligence. And there's no doubt there's a lot of buzz building, and there are applications almost everywhere, whether you look at ground transportation or air transportation, or you look at retail, or even settings like agriculture and biotech, and of course in media and marketing as well. And so we see lots of companies announcing AI initiatives. And this is a very interesting trend and almost a natural follow-up to the interest in analytics that has been there for the last 5-10 years. But I actually believe that most of these initiatives are actually going to fail. And they're going to fail not because AI is a buzzword without any potential, but it's going to fail because I feel that companies are actually approaching AI-driven initiatives incorrectly. And the reason I'm saying that is because we've seen this happen before. If we rewind back all the way, let's say, to the late 90s, the internet was the next big trend. And lots of companies started internet divisions and online divisions. And then soon after, the dot-com bust happened. And large companies, internet companies like Webvan and Pets.com failed. But when that happened, traditional companies that had started online divisions started reassessing whether they needed to be as aggressive with online, right? And so you have Kmart, for example, which was one of the first retailers to have an online division with bluelight.com. They decided to shut it down. Sony Music, which had one of the first online music stores, decided to shut it down. And lots of these companies moved on. And of course, a few years later, many of these industries, whether it was media or retail or travel, many of these industries were disrupted as online upstarts really were much better positioned 5, 6 years later. And of course, many other industries were transformed. The same thing happened in the mid-2000s, and then the buzz was surrounding cloud computing. And lots of companies, again, started exploring, how do we move our data and applications to the cloud? But then many issues came up, and these ranged from security issues or compliance issues. Healthcare companies that explored this said there's no way we can be HIPAA compliant. Payment card industries struggled with PCI compliance, and different companies had different security or compliance issues. And some of them backed off these initiatives. And the ones that persisted, they're the ones that were actually incredibly well positioned 5, 6 years later and had the business agility that was needed in sort of this digital era that we are in today. And I think there are signs that something similar is happening now with AI as well. And these are early signs, but I'm starting to see patterns that look very similar. So for example, 3 years back, chatbots was the talk of the town, or should I say chat of the town. Because every company I spoke to and asked, what are you doing in AI? They had a chatbot initiative that they were talking about. And you come back to today and you ask people, okay, what are you doing with chatbots? Oh, those things don't work. We've moved on and we aren't doing a whole lot over there, because the failure rates were quite high. In fact, one article talked about how companies that were building chatbots on the Facebook Messenger platform found that there was a 70% failure rate in the ability of these chatbots to actually service user requests. And it's not surprising, because I don't think natural language processing is there yet to have a conversation with humans. Certainly the platforms are not there yet in terms of enabling those capabilities. I mean, few companies like Google clearly have the resources to take that to a different level. But certainly in terms of open source software and APIs available, they don't support that level of sophistication. Similarly, we saw that with, say, in the healthcare, there was a lot of buzz about automated medical diagnosis. IBM's Watson was the leading name in this space. And yet, if you speak to many hospitals today, including close to my home, University of Pennsylvania's medical hospital, and they tell you that these systems actually don't work as well as promised, and in reality, doctors try them initially out of curiosity, and then 15 days later, they kind of say, this is not for me, and they stop using it. And so many of these initiatives are again struggling. And so there's many other such big AI-driven initiatives that many companies have launched with the hope of transforming how they serve customers, for example, or how they manage processes internally. And a lot of them are actually running into some hiccups. And I feel that there's a similar trend that might happen, and the issue largely is that companies, I feel, are approaching AI-driven business transformation incorrectly. But obviously, stopping would be a mistake, because AI clearly is a huge opportunity, and it is transformative in so many ways. And furthermore, if you look at what is the potential of AI, we're starting to see how the progress with AI is exponential in many ways. So for example, if we look at something like voice transcription, we're already getting to a point where machines are beating humans. Just yesterday, I read about this research study at Stanford where they showed that machines are beating humans now with reading comprehension and understanding what is actually being said in a passage. We start to see, of course, in customer analytics that there's a lot of things that can be automated, and we're beating humans there. Even something like image recognition. It used to be the case that with images, with not too long ago, like in 2010, like the chart at the bottom left indicates, in 2010, the best machine learning algorithms had an error rate as high as 30% with image recognition. Humans were at 5%. And in just 8 years, now we have machine learning algorithms beating human beings. They're down to sub 5%, around 2-3%, whereas human beings, well, we haven't improved much in 10 years. We still have the same error rate. So clearly, we're seeing machines beat humans at lots of activities. And there's actually a fair amount of evidence that with today's machine learning, we can automate a lot of things that we couldn't do even 5 years back. In fact, there was a report by McKinsey that looked at job activities, tasks at different kinds of companies, and looked at what can be automated with today's machine learning. And they concluded that about 45% of tasks or activities across these different industries could be activated or automated through today's machine learning technology. And then they looked at what actually has been done, and to see what's been done, they backed up a few years and they said, okay, we did an analysis of what can be done through just traditional analytics, not even advanced machine learning. And they found that companies have only captured less than 30% of the value that could be captured from existing analytics technologies. So for example, they found that in the public sector in EU, only 10 to 20% of the value from analytics was captured. In healthcare in the US, again, 10 to 20%. In manufacturing, it was about 20 to 30% of value that could be captured had actually been captured in practice using analytics. So with machine learning, there's a lot more potential. 45% of tasks can be automated. And of course, we're not just talking about automation of things that people already do, but also the ability to do new things that we didn't do before because it was too expensive, for example. And you can also get into those areas as well. The question is, how do we do this, right? And AI is a paradigm shift, so you can't just approach AI-driven transformation in the same way that you might have done with other initiatives. For example, analytics itself. I think there is something fundamentally different about this, and it requires new learning, changing your organizational DNA. And the question is, how do we continue to invest in this if we are not seeing returns today, right? And in my opinion, through my work with a few companies, I think there is a way to do this, and it involves changing the goals of AI-driven initiatives. It's not so much seeking returns in the short term, but it's really seeking organizational learning in the short term, and then looking for those returns in the long term. And so how does one do that? I think first of all, you have a portfolio kind of approach. You kind of say that when I'm really trying to do something with AI, I'm going to identify a set of things that I'm going to focus on as quick wins from AI within the next 6 months, and a small number of long-term projects where I'm looking for true business transformation. So in terms of quick wins, what I mean is point optimization of a large workflow. And in fact, some of that optimization might be internal to the company and not even customer-facing. For example, you could say that, say a pharmacy says that, look, we have a voice-based system for a pharmacist to query and figure out, whether a certain drug is in stock or not, instead of typing it in there, and it's maybe a little bit faster. Is this going to change the company? No, but it's a quick win. Maybe scheduling meetings internally with voice-based systems, or and both of these, by the way, can be done very easily with today's open source speech recognition software that's available. Or again, in terms of customer analytics, just doing very quick segmentation, which is very easy to do, and identify your key customer segments, how they differ from another. And many of you probably already do this, or recommending content. Recommender systems have been around for 15, 20 years, and it's pretty straightforward to apply an open source recommender, tune a few parameters, and start to do personalized recommendations. So these are quick wins that are very easy to do. And the point of this is not that this is going to transform the company. But the point of this is really twofold. The first is for us to be able to really build organizational learning. It's for us to be able to understand, what it takes to do large-scale data gathering, to label such data, to process such data, to make predictions, and then eventually use it in decision support, and finally in decision automation. right? And that's actually a big change for an organization, which doesn't happen overnight. Even if you hire engineers today, a lot of engineers are not trained in machine learning. Like I have an engineering degree in college, and when we did engineering, I did computer science. Machine learning and AI was not a big topic of interest because mostly it had failed until then. So the attention was somewhere else. And if you look at a lot of engineers today, they don't have the skills. And really the idea of these quick wins is to build organizational learning. The second value that these quick wins and these small projects provide is that it helps build consensus about the potential here. When people start to see that simple tasks that we used to do through a different way can be automated, they start to appreciate the potential here. And it's much easier to earn the trust of the stakeholders and to actually get the capital commitment from a CFO once they've seen these quick wins than to start off with a big transformative project right away, right? And so I think these quick wins are really important to the organization, and they get ignored a lot. And of course, it's not that we only pursue quick wins. We also go after long-term projects, and a long-term project might be something that changes the complete end-to-end workflow. And so that might mean, for example, I'll use a few different settings. So let's say we look at insurance, for example. With insurance, you can, with today's technologies, at least start an initiative where if somebody, let's say for car insurance, wants to file a claim, they can take a photograph of the damage to the car, upload it using the app of the insurance company. The images come in, that can be processed by image recognition systems that can then really compare it to past damages and figure out a few things. Is this a legitimate damage? Is this the same car? Is this some other car? What does this look like? What is the likely damage? What's the likely reimbursement amount? And then eventually get into automating the decision for some of the smaller claims so that you don't have to have a human being even get involved with the smaller claims. You can automate that, but obviously that cannot be done today in 6 months. It might need 4 or 5 years for us to get that working perfectly before you completely roll it out, right? Or you could say in customer analytics, we want to get to a point where we can completely automate the process of analyzing customer data, figuring out their preferences, coming up with personalized content, offers, products for these people, and also integrating that experience across the web, mobile, and even emails, so they have one experience across all these platforms and a personalized experience based on who they are. And it's doable today, but it takes some time to actually get that full thing working and to have a seamless experience across different channels and a one-to-one kind of experience with the consumer, right? And so that, again, is one of these long-term projects that one can pull off. So I want to share an example of Google, and I had a chance to work with one of the execs there who was leading an AI team. And this was around the time Google announced that they're going to be an AI-first company, right? And so this was a big decision for Google. If we rewind back, I forget the year, but maybe around, was it 2008 or 2007? Google announced they're going to be a mobile-first company. And they decided to switch emphasis and focus on mobile, and they were very strong on the desktop, and they didn't understand mobile, and they actually did a great job of transitioning to mobile. And part of that was also investing, buying Android, and investing in it, and helping the operating system grow, and eventually making sure that mobile search is well protected from both Apple and Microsoft. Similarly, a few years back, the CEO, Sundar Pichai, announced that they're going to be an AI-first company, and they're going to really reimagine the company around AI. Now, this was an easy thing to say, but very hard to pull off, because Google had 30,000 engineers, and almost none of them had been trained in machine learning, because they had all been trained in software engineering under a different paradigm. So you've got to retrain them at scale. You're putting money into this, and you want to show ultimately to the shareholders, to Wall Street, that all these investments in AI are paying off. And not only do you have the scale of the problem, but you also have this question of what do we pursue with AI? Driverless cars or spam detection in my email, right? And so you have lots of ways you can apply AI. And in my work with them, I think we looked at a few things, a few issues ranging from training to portfolio and issues like that. And one of the things that Google did was to approach this through a portfolio kind of model. And so their decision was that we will start with lots of quick wins and a few big initiatives. The few big initiatives, driverless car. We're not expecting a return on that in the next 10 years. And we'll invest in that. But when somebody asks, what is happening with all your AI investments, we have other answers, because we're also going to push for quick wins. And the purpose of quick wins is to build that consensus, not only in the organization, but also with shareholders and other stakeholders, and also build learning. So the quick wins, the way it was pulled off, was that every product team within Google was told, you have to roll out something using machine learning in the next, not year, not 2 years, 3 months. And they said, it doesn't matter what it is. Just roll out machine learning in some capacity, and we will loan you some of these machine learning people we have hired in a centralized way, and you can roll these out in some manner. And so, for example, Gmail says, you know what, we will just do one simple thing in there, which is that we'll start with spam detection. We have a bunch of rules for spam detection. We'll try and do a little more machine learning over there and see what we can do with that. Or search says, okay, we're going to see if we can add some machine learning into our ranking algorithm, search ranking algorithm. Previously, it was all based on this formula called PageRank, which would just decide how to rank results higher. And now we'll actually use data on what are people clicking. And if we see that the second rank result is getting more clicks or as many clicks as a top rank result, even though its page rank is lower, we'll actually use the data to re-rank this. Something very simple and straightforward. So every team was asked to do that. Their data center team said, we will start predicting what our energy usage will be 3 hours from now based on weather data and things like that. We'll look at temperature, air pressure, and those kinds of things, and just predict what our energy usage will be. So everyone had to do these small initiatives. And the idea was to build learning. And then, over time, launch these big initiatives. And those big initiatives have been successful. So for example, the data center team started by predicting what will be our energy usage given temperature and pressure data you're getting from different sources. At some point, they said, if we can start to predict well, then we can start to do energy management. We can start to pre-program, how our cooling will work and how our, because if you look at a data center, energy is actually a huge part of the expenses at a data center, and most of that energy actually goes into HVAC, that is actually cooling, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. So air conditioning is what eats up most of the energy. And so they rolled out their system, and they actually reduced their energy expenses by 40% when they rolled it out. And when they turn it off, the energy expense goes back. Because previously it was it's a system that's hardwired that does not respond to new data as it comes in about air, temperature, pressure, and so on, right? And they had this 40% return. Gmail had started to experiment with machine learning. They said, okay, we can start to do more things. One of the first big projects they announced internally was smart replies, right? So let's automate replies for people. And obviously, we all, many of us use it today, and it's a big deal. But when they started off, it was not clear they could pull it off. You get an email, and Gmail is going to recommend a response. And obviously, they aren't done yet. They can recommend simple responses to emails like, thank you, sounds good, let's do it, and things like that. But at some point, they're going to take that and have, multi-sentence responses as well, based on what's the content of the email that was sent to us. And so there's been many of these kinds of initiatives, and they have been getting returns from those initiatives because they started off with the quick wins. The other question or challenge for them was, how do we retrain our employees, right? 25,000 engineers at that time, 30,000 today, right? And so that's a tough problem. And so they started off first having a centralized AI team, and they said, we'll loan our centralized machine learning people to individual product teams. because the idea was that we can't have machine learning be a knowledge base that's available to a very few people at a centralized level. Every product team needs to have it. It needs to be diffused. It needs to be a basic knowledge as opposed to expert knowledge that's available with a few. So we loan people to individual teams to do these 3-month initiatives, right? And then they started announcing courses. And they had, these Wednesday evenings, they would have classes on campus. People could come to it. It was oversubscribed. Then they started recording it and releasing it internally through videos. People were dialing in from Bangalore to listen to some of these classes here. They said, okay, we'll make it all available through video, consume it when you want. They announced a program internally where they said, if anyone wants to really learn machine learning, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a 6-month sabbatical from your product team, join the centralized machine learning team, come sit in that group, have a machine learning mentor who's going to work with you closely. Your project may be related to your product or something else, but come in, work with a centralized machine learning mentor for 6 months, get retrained, and then you go back. And that has been quite successful for the company because many of these people got retrained. Obviously, they don't want everyone on a product team to go all at once, but they kind of say, okay, within a product team, 1 or 2 people can come in, spend 6 months. And it turns out many of those projects are related to the product team that they were in anyway. And so they've been retraining thousands of people in machine learning. They aren't there yet in terms of their goal. Their original goal was 25,000 software engineers who know machine learning, and now it's 30,000 engineers who know machine learning. They aren't there yet, but they already have successfully trained thousands of software engineers in the machine learning paradigm. So it was really focused on organizational learning first in order to be an AI-first company. Change the DNA of the organization, and that was their focus. And to have this portfolio kind of approach so you can build consensus among internal and external stakeholders about the possibilities here. Now, of course, that's Google's example, and Google has amazing resources, right? And to start off a talent base that's already very advanced in terms of their skill sets, right? And so not everyone can do what Google can do. But I think there's good news for any company out there. And the good news really is that one of the big changes happening over the last few years is a democratization of machine learning technologies. And so you see this democratization in many ways. First of all, there are specialized hardware available on rent. There's specialized software available in an open source way that you can just download for free, or if you wanted more user-friendly versions that are available on the cloud that you can again pay in a subscription manner, in a SaaS kind of manner. And then finally, you have availability of data sets and algorithms as well in marketplaces. And so there's a lot of infrastructure available that we can build on top of. For example, if you look on the hardware side, over the last few years, there have been specialized chipsets that have been created for machine learning, like Google's TPU or NVIDIA's chip for machine learning. Now, of course, these are great at machine learning, but as a non-technology company, you're not going to say, okay, I'm going to buy these chips and set up my machine learning infrastructure. Instead, again, here the good news is that Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and many other companies offer this within their cloud services. So within AWS, for example, you have machine learning capabilities where if you do heavy-duty machine learning, you can just rent that kind of computing and do your machine learning on top of that infrastructure, right? And so that's on the hardware side. On the software side, again, there's open source frameworks available for machine learning, and Google's TensorFlow is one of the more popular one, but there's open source like Apache's MXNet, which Amazon uses, is open source. There's many other frameworks available, all of which is open source. And so again, if you say that, my engineers aren't yet, ready to be able to use Tensor, for example, to do things, there's also user-friendly versions of that, with simple GUI user interface that developers can use, drag and drop tools to do machine learning, for example. I think Microsoft's Azure ML Studio does a pretty good job of, just pull the data set in and do some basic machine learning with it, and you start to see insights right away. And you don't even need to be an engineer to do some of that stuff, to get started with at least. And then finally, you have marketplaces for data and algorithms. So for example, if I wanted to figure out how to do face recognition on images, or if I wanted to color black and white images, there are algorithms available on marketplaces like Algorithmia where I just download this, and it takes me a couple hours to figure out how to use the algorithm, and boom, I have now colored a bunch of black and white images. Or I have done face recognition well with that, right? And so there's lots of algorithms available in marketplaces that you can download. Similarly, data sets. You could argue that Google, Facebook have a data advantage relative to other companies. And obviously, they will always have that data advantage, but it doesn't mean that companies with smaller scale have to start from zero, because again, there are marketplaces for data sets. Kaggle is an example of that. And you can get these data sets, and then you can use it. And so I think the barriers to entry have been lowered, and at least in order to get started, there's a lot of infrastructure available on a pay-as-you-go basis, and furthermore, data sets and algorithms available for us to get started, right? So I think that's a great starting point for a lot of companies. So in short, my template for transforming around AI involves first setting up a brain trust with many insiders, but with a couple outsiders as well to give you an outsider's perspective, and to go through your workflows and identify what can be automated within there. Then go through that list, and then really identify which ones among this set are quick wins, which ones are long-term. And I actually do this exercise with many companies, and it turns out with a lot of managers, they say, here's a quick win. But then you speak to an engineer, and they say, that's not a quick win. That's actually long-term. It's going to take us 2 years to actually get that working, right? So I think having that conversation of what's the right time frame and what's a quick win and what's a long-term initiative is important. And identify a 2-year portfolio where you say we have a number of quick wins. A quick win is something we can pull off in 6 months, and we have it ready and working with users within 6 months. So really, it's all about doing things fast as opposed to changing the organization, having that impact, right? It's about learning really, and getting results. And then once you've got a portfolio where you've got some long-term projects as well, then you go ahead and proceed. And obviously, there are many questions here. Do I build or I buy? Right? And so in many non-tech companies, you could say, I can outsource this, I can buy this from someone else, and that's great. But if you're only buying, then there's no organizational learning happening. And so you kind of always stay behind the curve. So there's certain things you have to build in order to build that organizational learning in this new paradigm, right? And then you ask, is the AI team going to be centralized? Like in some companies, like in, for example, the Google exec with whom I worked, he's now at JP Morgan Chase running their AI initiative, and they have a centralized AI team. Or you do it in a decentralized way, like with Google, you say this has to be in every product team, everywhere in the organization, right? So there's a number of questions to explore. So in summary, my message is really about organizational learning. That's the key goal with AI initiatives, changing the organizational DNA and having a portfolio approach, as opposed to pursuing 1 or 2 really big wins with AI, right? I think that's the main message here. So I've written about this a fair bit. In fact, with the Google exec with whom I worked, so the first article is, the two of us wrote in Harvard Business Review on the challenges with AI-driven transformation. The second one is at Knowledge at Wharton. We wrote about democratization of machine learning and what this means for non-tech companies as well. Yeah, and by the way, if you kind of don't believe anything I'm saying, I can just say that, hey, you know what, even Eric Schmidt endorsed our viewpoint, and he shared this, and he said, hey, look at this article these guys wrote on, how should businesses invest in AI? So that's my fallback when people don't believe I'm credible.